Okay, so I'm gonna start by talking about just kind of what I like, what stuck with me from both of the readings. So, the um, the first reading about Howard's four dispositions, I definitely related to a lot of the different dispositions, and I thought about maybe how I had or didn't have those dispositions. I definitely thought that I would be like higher with the dialogue, the democracy, and the difference one, but maybe a little bit lower on disillusionment, just because I wasn't really used to experiencing anything that like challenged my way of thought. And so I feel like it can be a little more jarring and like put me in more of a defensive state when that does happen. But my other big takeaway from that reading was I liked when it talked about the three stages of white identity orientation. I thought it was super interesting to consider like how someone comes to like recognize their own identity, what that really means to them, and then how that's different from other people. I definitely see myself going through it a little bit, but also hope to be going through it more in the future just because I have been and continue at CC to be relatively sheltered from anything super different from me, so it's hard for me to really recognize my identity. I feel like when it's just kind of the same as everyone else, I feel like I don't really have an idea of where I am individually, more as just like part of a bigger group in the whole of the student body of wherever I've been. And then the other one with the scales and the reading, when I took the survey, I found that I was lowest on reflection, like the praxis one, moderate on the community disposition, and then higher on the social justice disposition, which kind of followed what I thought would happen, except for I kind of assumed I'd be higher in reflection, but otherwise it seemed pretty consistent with what I expected. And so when I was thinking about what I was feeling during those readings, I wrote down my feelings of guilt, excitement, reflection. I felt a little scared, and I felt motivated. So I think a lot of the guilt just came from like wanting to change my answers, but not being able to really do so and reflect a reality. I felt pretty guilty just for being so privileged that I don't really ever reflect on my identity. And honestly, when I think about that question, it's just super hard for me. I don't really know like what my identity is, what my culture is, just because I've grown up with such a like homogenous place where everyone has the same kind of background as me, so I never really had to reflect on that and consider that, and I feel like it's harder to come up with an answer for that when I don't really have anything to compare it to, because it's just like normal. It's nothing I've really had to think about. And oh yeah, I thought the questions also brought up some stuff just beyond like being a teacher, just in my own life. I have always struggled with being vulnerable and being open. And then the other one was struggling with conflict and facing disagreement. I think those both also come from my positionality and my background. I think I never really had to be vulnerable. I feel like at school, we didn't really talk about that kind of stuff. It was just like like social emotional learning, but super surface level. And then at home, my family was always super busy and just like moving forward. We didn't really take a lot of time for reflection. And then I just feel like, I mean, I had a pretty easy life, so I feel like I never really had to be vulnerable about anything difficult that was happening to me. And that's definitely changed a little bit in college. I've had to kind of come to terms with some mental health stuff and really think about how I can be vulnerable, to talk about that with my family, with counselors, with people who can help me, and that's definitely been a shift, something I'm working on. And yeah, same thing with the conflict and disagreement. I just think growing up in a town where everyone really kind of was the same, had the same ideas that they expressed, it was hard because I just never really experienced that much disagreement or conflict, and so I never really had strategies to deal with it, and I could always avoid it if I wanted to, because I mean, it really didn't show up, and then when it did, I feel like there were always people that could kind of express my opinion for me or with me, back me up, or honestly, I don't know, I felt like I wanted to avoid disagreement, and I was very easily able to, and so now I struggle when it does come up, because I just continue to avoid it. I don't have any strategies for that. And then the last thing I thought about was, about feedback. I always kind of thought I was good at taking feedback, and I now realize that that's because a lot of times the feedback was all good, and it's obviously a lot easier to take good feedback. But I do recognize sometimes it's hard to take negative feedback, feel like it's an attack, kind of a personal attack, get more defensive about it. And that's something I've always wanted to work on, is just being able to like take feedback and change from it. I think that's one of my priorities, is going from being able to reflect to actually going to a praxis, like acting on the reflection. So I already talked about a few of my assumptions, that I would be higher in dialogue and lower on disillusionment. That one was correct on the disillusionment part, I think, but a little incorrect on the dialogue part. I always thought I was good at dialogue just because like I'm a good listener, but I think that the bringing in the components of the conflict and disagreement that are inevitable and necessary, and then also bringing in the component of vulnerability, as I've discussed earlier, are two of the things that I'm still working on. And then, again, I assumed I would be good at the reflection part, and I think I have gotten better at it, but definitely the praxis part, like acting on feedback and acting on my reflections, and not getting defensive or shutting down, just accepting a failure, but seeing how I can change it, is definitely something that I'm still working on. And then one of my last assumptions was I'd always kind of assumed that getting to know students and recognizing their identity and their positionalities was like more important than like expressing and recognizing my own, and definitely this reading changed my thoughts about that. I realized that like coming to terms with my own positionality, I can't really do anything productive with knowing students' identities or positionalities until I'm able to come to terms with my own, see how it compares to students, and how it affects my teaching. And then I also think like the vulnerability portion plays a lot into that. I feel like if I can't be vulnerable, I can't really ask my students to be vulnerable. So I definitely have changed my thinking about that and recognized more of how I need to figure out my own background, my own identity before asking students to do so. Let's see. Yeah, I've already talked a lot about my background, my positionality that affected all this, with like a homogenous, sheltered, privileged town that I grew up in and kind of still am at CC, just a little more open, I feel like, and making me see and understand a few more things. I think a lot of this has been through education classes here. I feel like we discuss identity a lot, which has been huge for me, and it's made me like reflect on my background and recognize these things about growing up, and kind of act on those reflections in trying to become more reflective, trying to understand my identity more, and trying to like overcome just like the lack of development of these important skills. And then I think another thing that's really helped with this is I've really developed a better ability to listen. I feel like I've always been pretty good at listening, a lot of times because I don't like to talk as much, but always been pretty good at listening, but really listening, realizing who I need to listen to, and then not just listening and saying, oh yeah, that's a different experience than mine, and so there it is, but like understanding that I need to understand that as much as mine, because that's what other people are experiencing, probably other people that I'm working with, that I'm teaching, and I need to understand that to be able to work with them better. So what I want to do with all this, to bring into my own teaching, I hope to just really center my teaching on like a two-way dialogue where everyone's a teacher, everyone's a student. I want to be able to start my classes by like sharing my identity, my positionality. I need to have a more developed idea of that, and then having students feel comfortable enough to really call me out, call me in, whatever the term is, but to make sure that I'm really doing the best I can for them. Similarly, I want to know about their positionality, their identity. I want to know kind of where they're coming from, where they want to go, where they're at now, and then like their learning styles, what best works for them in the classroom. And I think it'd be good to do this through individual conversations. I know one of my professors kind of had it as like an assignment that you had to go to in office hours with him. I think that helped get to know him and have him get to know us. And then also just being a part of the community really genuinely and authentically, I think is super important. And I just want my classroom to really be centered around collaboration, discussion, and like the co-creation of knowledge. I think these are all things I still work on a lot, because the discussion obviously with the conflict and collaboration, I've always kind of enjoyed individual work, I think mostly because I'm more introverted and have always kind of tended to stick to myself, but I really think that the value of collaboration is just so much bigger. And the last question was just kind of how I was going to do this. So definitely through professional development, and then I think just looking for and acting on feedback from myself through reflection, from my colleagues, and then also just from students, just how they think I'm doing, and how they think I can better my teaching. So yeah, I went a little over time, sorry.